you. Thank you for your gifts of your time and your talent and these treasures, which I know these days can be really hard to come by. Please know that we'll share them with the Friends of the Saugatucket with all the generosity with which they're given. Thank you for being here today.
There is a saying that we have all heard: the more it changes, the more it's the same. We can all agree that we face many significant challenges today, both here in our own society and in the wider world. Like many of us, I feel that many of today's issues echo those of half a century ago. I want to speak today of then and now. And in connection with all of this, our theme today of the sixth principle and resistance is very relevant. Now, our sixth principle, as you've heard already, says that we agree to promote and affirm the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. This is a goal that is at once both lofty and just. It has much history behind it, and there are many good reasons to believe in it. So to my own story. In the late 1960s, I was a teenager and I was approaching age 18, draft age. The Vietnam War was raging. I knew that I could not get a college deferment and the National Guard was not for me. I would have to either submit to the draft or resist it. If I submitted, then like so many of my generation, I could very likely be sent to fight in Vietnam, a war with which I profoundly disagreed. If I resisted, I faced condemnation from many fellow Americans who saw the war as justified in stopping communist totalitarianism. Along with that, the possibility of jail time or exile in Canada were both real possibilities. So what did I do? What didn't I do? I did participate in nonviolent protest marches, both in my native Baltimore and in nearby Washington, D.C. Marching along Howard Street in downtown Baltimore with 10,000 like-minded people helped give me the courage to hold fast in the face of curses thrown at us by jingoists and militarists. I did not smash windows, set fires, or participate in riots. I did not set off bombs. And I did not support those who did. I did register for the draft, and I requested conscientious objector, CO, status. With help from my Quaker meeting, I prepared to defend that claim before the mighty bureaucracy, whose job it was to produce young men to go and fight in the war. I did not burn my draft card. I did shout out my protest against corruption and war, loud and clear. I did not curse at or abuse any returning US veterans. I have no doubt that such incidents did happen back then, and I'm sorry that they did. I never viewed the young men who became soldiers as my enemies just because they went to war, whether willingly or not. I did face the fact that my government and my country were then run by powerful interests that valued profits above human life and power above democracy. I did not leave the country. I understand those who believed that that was their only option, but I'm glad I didn't reach that decision myself. So by 1971, the year I was eligible to be drafted, the number of men being drafted was down from its peak. Americans could dare once again to hope that the hated war was coming to an end. In response to my claim to be considered for CO status, my draft board finally sent me a "don't call us, we'll call you" letter. My high number in that year's draft lottery meant draft lottery meant that they wouldn't need me, and that was that. I never heard from them again. Fast forward now to 2016, the year we all got the electoral shock of our lives. The election that year of a far-right adherent without apparent moral compass or regard for the rule of law as President of the United States shook me profoundly, as it did millions of others. From deep inside me, there welled up a call to resistance. Just as I had in the Vietnam era, I felt that I could not do otherwise. One event from that time stands out in particular for me as an example of resistance. The first Women's March on January 21st, 2017. Now, I happened to be in Seattle for business that week, and I decided to stay over for the march that weekend. A crowd that was estimated at well over 120,000 people in Seattle, along with millions of people around the world, turned out to protest the inauguration of the new president. In Seattle, the turnout was many times the size that had been expected. It was a day for nonviolent and mostly silent protest. I went there in a carpool with local UUs, and I was buoyed by our camaraderie. It was thrilling. I felt exhilarated by the end of the day, and I remember saying that if we can do something like this, we can win. When we finally arrived at Election Day in 2020, I was quietly happy to see the former president defeated for re-election. The nation had showed him the door. The far right has proved to be tougher than anyone has expected. They play for keeps and they play dirty. Their main guy is currently out of office, but he wants to be re-elected. He may succeed or he may not. But with or without him, Americans who love democracy will face a country where there continues to be a well-funded, long-term effort by far-right reactionaries to gain power by subverting our democracy and our government. So in light of our goal of world community, how are we called to resist today? I think there is no one-size-fits-all answer. Maybe it is by supporting Ukraine in their fight against the Russian invasion of their nation, in resistance also to Americans who openly and mistakenly admire Vladimir Putin, or by standing vigil on the steps of a public building, or joining the protest marches of today, or signing petitions, or attending school board meetings. We will certainly not get there by resorting to violence. In thinking about this, I turn again to our sixth principle for inspiration. Our goal is world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And in looking to that goal, I realize that this I believe: when people stand together peacefully to promote liberty and justice, we will eventually achieve a worldwide community, the one we all dream of. May it be so. And now
testimony of folk legend Pete Seeger before the House Un-American Activities Committee on August 15th of 1955. Sky will read the part of Mr. Seeger, and I will be reading three parts as if they were one. Committee member Francis Walter, a Democrat, and Gordon Scherer, a Republican, and HUAC's chief counsel, Frank Tavener Jr., who was known as a sloth-talking, methodical prosecutor. I'm going to be reading them all as one person, one fast-talking person. Consider it dramatic license. The committee has information obtained in part from the Daily Worker indicating that over a period of time, especially since December 1945, you took part in numerous entertainment features. I have before me a photostatic copy of the June 20th, 1947 issue of the Daily Worker. In it appears this advertisement: tonight, Bronx, hear Pete Seeger and his guitar at Allerton Section housewarming. May I ask you whether or not the Allerton section was a section of the Communist Party?
Sir, I refuse to answer that question, whether it was a quote from the New York Times or the Vegetarian Journal.
I don't believe there is any more authoritative document in regard to the Communist Party than its official organ, the Daily Worker.
Sir, the whole line of questions.
You have only been asked one question so far.
I am not going to answer any questions as to my association, my philosophical or religious beliefs, or my political beliefs, or how I voted in any election, or any of these private affairs. I think these are very improper questions for any American to be asked, especially under a compulsion such as this. I would be very glad to tell you my life if you want to hear of it.
I have before me the photostatic copy of the April 30th, 1948 issue of the Daily Worker, which carries an advertisement of a May Day rally for peace, security, and democracy. Did you lend your talent to the Essex County Communist Party on the occasion indicated by this article?
I believe I have already answered this question and the same answer.
In other words, you mean that you declined to answer because of the reasons stated before?
I gave my answer, sir.
What is your answer?
You see, sir, I feel...
What is your answer?
I feel that in my whole life, I've never done anything of any conspiratorial nature, and I resent very much and very deeply the implication of being called before this committee because my opinions may be different from yours, that I'm any less of an American than anyone else. I love you very deeply, sir.
Why don't you make a little contribution toward preserving its institutions then?
I feel my whole life is a contribution. That is why I'd like to tell you about it.
I don't want to hear about it. I direct you to answer the question.
I have already given you my answer, sir.
Let me understand. You're not relying on the Fifth Amendment, are you?
No, sir, although I do not want to in any way discredit the witnesses that have used the Fifth Amendment. I simply feel that it is improper for this committee to ask such questions.
You said that you would tell us about the songs. Did you participate in a program at Wingdale Lodge on the weekend of July 4th of this year?
Again, I say I will be glad to tell you what songs I have ever sung because singing is my business. But I decline to say who has ever listened to them, who has written to them, or other people who have sung them.
Did you sing this song to which I have referred, Now is the Time, at Wingdale Lodge on the weekend of July 4th?
I don't know any song by that name, although I do know a song with a similar name. It is called Wasn't That a Time? Is that the song?
Did you sing that song?
I can sing it. I don't know how well I can do it without my banjo.
I said, did you sing it on that occasion?
I have sung that song. I'm not going to go into where I have sung it. I've sung it many places.
Did you sing it on this particular occasion? That is what you are being asked.
Again, my answer is the same.
You said you would tell us about it.
I will tell you about the songs, but I'm not going to tell you or try to explain.
I direct you to answer the question. Did you sing this particular song on 4th of July at Wingdale Lodge in New York?
I've already given you my answer to that question and all questions such as that. I feel that it is improper to ask about my associations and opinions. I have said that I would be voluntarily glad to tell you any song or what I have done in my life.
My question was whether or not you sang at these functions of the Communist Party. You've answered it inferentially, and if I understand your answer, you're saying you did.
Except for that answer, I decline to answer further.
You understand it is the feeling of the committee that you are in contempt as a result of the position you take?
I can't say.
I'm telling you that is the position of the committee.
I decline to discuss under compulsion where I have sung and who has sung my songs and who else has sung with me and the people I have known. I love my country very dearly, and I greatly resent this implication that some of the places I have sung and some of the people that I have known and some of my opinions, whether they are religious or philosophical, make me any less of an American.
Thank you. Just so you know, that was greatly edited. It was so redundant, it would have made your eyes blur. It was amazing. But I hope that Sky and I were able to give you a little taste of what it was like when Pete Seeger appeared before HUAC. A glimpse into the earnestness that was intended to disarm his interrogators and maybe even undermine their authority. It was comical the way he said he'd be happy to sing Wasn't That a Time without his banjo. He was speaking truth to power with the feigned innocence of a fool. But of course, we all know Pete Seeger was no fool. For those of you who don't know, he was a founding member of the Weavers, a folk quartet active in the 1950s. He was a notable social activist and a committed peacenik. His activism and testimony before the House Un-American Activities Committee got him blacklisted for more than a decade. He was brilliant, worldly, well-traveled, a man who sang down-home songs to shine a light on oppression. He was never officially a Unitarian Universalist, though he was a friend of several of our congregations in the United States. And when he died back in 2014, we all felt it very deeply. The way Mr. Seeger appeared before HUAC reminds me of a rabbi named Yeshua entering the city of Jerusalem more than 2,000 years ago. Today is the Christian commemoration of that day, Palm Sunday. In his part of the world, he's come to be known as Jesus. And the part of the story that gets told most often here is that he was ending a tour of the region, which at each stop drew incredible crowds who were enthusiastic to hear his teachings. And as he arrived in Jerusalem, he was fanned with palm leaves, a gesture of respect and adoration. And many Christians today talk about that event as triumphant. Jesus knew he was going to have to account for his actions and that he would die because of them. But he proceeded with courage. While that may be true, there's also more to the story. If you read any translation of the New Testament, you learn that during the days leading up to his execution on the cross, Jesus was often afraid, angry, resentful, even doubtful of God's plan. And that day, on Palm Sunday, he arrived not riding an impressive steed, but a donkey. All four Gospels, in each one of them, which is a little bit different, Jesus lumbered into the city of Jerusalem, riding the slow and inelegant animal for two reasons. Now, the obvious reason, the reason lifted up by Orthodox Christians, is that he did so in fulfillment of the prophecy He did so in fulfillment of the prophecy of the Hebrew Bible. The book of Zechariah said that the king would arrive on a donkey as a symbol of humility and leadership. But scholars like John Dominic Crossan and Marcus Borg have a different idea. They don't just study the words and deeds of Jesus recorded in the canon, they study the historical context of the actual living man, Yeshua from Nazareth, in order to better understand the meaning of his work and life in that time and that place. Modern scholars say that Jesus arrived on a donkey as a counterbalance, a stark contrast to another procession that was happening at the same moment, the arrival of the Roman prefect, entering into the city on a chariot driven by a team of horses. To people in power, in comparison, Jesus looked like an ass riding an ass. But really, in a quiet way, he was highlighting through contrast the excesses of the oppressive power structure and lifting up the collective power of ordinary people, poor people, oppressed people. Both Yeshua of Nazareth and Pete Seeger empowered others to work for the betterment of humanity. Now, I'm not saying that Pete Seeger was some sort of Messiah or Christ figure. But what I'm saying is that the two men, these two fully human, imperfect men, influenced regular people in common ways by standing up to the power structures, even to their own detriment. And that's ultimately what our sixth principle is about, isn't it? Striving for peace, liberty, and justice for all, no matter the cost. And when you take into account all of the other principles that we've talked about in the last 3 months, the only way we can possibly strive for peace, liberty, and justice and uphold the rest of those principles is to do it nonviolently. And if the spectacles of Palm Sunday and Pete Seeger's testimony teach us anything, it's that nonviolent resistance requires a little humor and occasionally playing the part of the fool. With all the horror and wackiness of the world going on, the former president being indicted for illegal actions related to paying hush money to a porn star, while the statue of David is being called pornography. Gun-toting terrorists are being protected for doing his dirty work as schools get shot up weekly. Drag is being outlawed. Books are being banned. The people elected as our leaders are as foolish as the House Un-American Activities Committee, as excessive in the performance of power as the Roman prefect of Jerusalem. Isn't this the time when we should follow the examples of Pete Seeger and maybe even Jesus himself and be willing to play the fool now and again? To ask the tough questions that expose tyranny? Isn't this the time to really live out our sixth principle? Let's rise now in body or in spirit and sing hymn number 169, We Shall Overcome.